Ready?
Yep.
Ready? Okay, ready? 3,
Yep.
2, 1, because I'll trim that off. All right. All right, happy Sunday. All right, everyone, thanks for kind of joining. I thought the best way to start this series, of course, would be to start with my sister, Tracey Meares. For those of you who don't really know her, well, first off, you got to Google her, because she actually has her own Wikipedia.
That I did not create.
That you did not create. But Tracey is a very successful law professor. You worked with Eric Holder.
I did.
You're on President Obama's task force, correct?
21st century task force on 21st century policing.
Okay. So very successful in her own right, from Springfield, Illinois, and actually was it 1984?
Yes, I graduated from this school in 1984.
Yeah. So there's a lot, I think a lot of people don't know maybe what happened during high school in 1984. I was just a freshman, you were a senior, so I'm not really sure I even understood everything, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to let people know kind of that situation that happened back in high school.
I assume you're talking about when I became, when I was valedictorian of the class of 1984, but not recognized as such. Yeah, it was really an interesting situation. I mean, I've been driving around Springfield. I don't come home very often. Our parents have moved to the west side, so this was an area that I actually spent a lot of time in that I never see anymore. And so it's been, I don't know, a good probably 15 years since I even set foot on these steps. And I would say my time in Springfield High School was pretty happy. I had lots of friends.
Well, and you were active.
Very
you were
successful.
cheerleader, very academic. But what I want to go into is when you spoke about that you were supposed to be valedictorian, but somehow some things occurred to allow another student to be valedictorian in your place.
No, that's not exactly.
Or how did it happen?
What happened was that that at the time their grade point average was calculated by some combination of how difficult your classes were and what your grades were, like whether you were taking AP or accelerated classes. And going into my senior year, it was pretty clear that I had the highest grade point average because I took very difficult classes. And there was another person who I think I don't know, she may have gotten all A's, it didn't matter. She wasn't taking the kinds of classes that I was taking. And at the time, so I decided, I care about this. It's going to be another thing that I could achieve. So I wanted to be valedictorian, and our class counselor at the time, Pauline Betts, would, every quarter she would look at the calculation and say what I needed to get. You only need to get X, Y, and Z in order for you to be valedictorian. And one day she brought me into her office and told me that she came into her office, and the head counselor at the time, I've been told I shouldn't say his name, although I have no problem saying who this racist was, was in her office going through her files, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And he had gotten my files out, and at the time, see, people don't understand in 2017 when everything is in a computer. This was all on paper.
Right.
And so if he was actually able to alter my records, eventually we would figure it out, but by the time it got out, it wouldn't have mattered. Right? And so Pauline Betts, when she figured out what he was doing, bought her own lock at the local hardware store and put a lock on the records so that nobody could change it, and just vigilantly. So when it became clear that they couldn't change it, they then decided that, and the principal at the time, who apparently will also remain nameless,
although you could look it up in the records if you chose to.
Person changed the rules so that there would not actually be a valedictorian of the class named at graduation.
Right.
We just had 2 students. So traditionally, the valedictorian did the invocation
And then
of
the
graduation, and the salutatorian did the, the closing
Right.
or whatever. And they were named in the program as
Right.
these, and it didn't happen. And it was, I can't remember, and it's hard for me to dredge it up, but I think it's safe to say I was unhappy. I could probably come up with some other words, but
You can use expletives if you need to.
I was pretty pissed.
Yeah.
And and my mom made it a thing appropriately. There's a history too, because there had been 1, maybe 2 other African American valedictorians of Springfield High School, both black women, neither of whom, and this was a long time ago. I mean, one thinks like by the 1980s,
Right.
we'd be over that, right? These women were in the 60s, and they were not recognized.
Right.
As valedictorian, just like, come on now, right? So after it's all over, I think a week or 2 after graduation, Springfield High School, this is probably another piece you don't know, mailed a newsletter to everyone in our class with 2 alternative class rankings. One class ranking was with weighted grade point averages, which is the way you should do it.
Right.
And I was number 1.
Right.
Then they had an alternative ranking based on the person who got the most A's.
But it didn't matter like what, it wasn't calculus,
No.
it wasn't
No.
high.
No.
Right. You just got the most
You
A's.
just got the most A's.
Right.
And I think on that list I was 3. And this woman that they wanted to be 1 was
Right.
1.
Right.
And you're just kind of like,
Right.
seriously, dog? Actually, I think on that other list, the person who was principal at the time, his daughter was in my class. And I think maybe she was 2 or 4. I don't know. If you're watching, you can look it up, and I don't care. But yes, this all happened a couple weeks after graduation. So here's, I don't remember when she was calling.
Okay, sorry, we had a little glitch, and in our editing. All right, so you're talking about grandma.
Yeah. So
and her role.
the final part of the story is our grandmother was a civil rights activist, and many people who are watching this probably have they have to be really much older than us, than we are, to remember, because Springfield used to have a form of government called a mayor-council government, where the mayor and then the particular commissioners were elected at large, and there was like a commissioner of water and blah blah, and a commissioner of electricity, blah blah, whatever. We did not have the mayor-aldermanic system that we have now. And for decades, these commissioners were all elected from a very concentrated geographic area, sort of around where we used to live, where we grew up. And so our grandmother and some other African American plaintiffs brought a civil rights suit through the Department of Justice to change the form of government in Springfield to be more representative of the people who live here. And this is the form of government that people watching this have experienced for most of their lives. They probably don't even remember what it was like before. We have our grandmother and a few other people to thank for that. And so in order to win that lawsuit, you have to prove pervasive discrimination by state officials, city officials. And by state, I don't mean Illinois state, I mean the state as opposed to private, in the city. And so I turned out to be a piece of evidence in the lawsuit, the fact that these people who are essentially government officials, this is a public high school, tried to keep me, an African American woman, from being, well, I was a girl.
Well, and it actually, I will say that SJR actually had an article about
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
I can't remember when, and they spoke
I
a little
think,
bit about
like,
your
maybe
situation.
10 years later
Yeah.
or something
Yeah.
after it happened. But so so there's that, but the reason why, and this is probably a part of the story that you don't know, I actually didn't know that I was part of that suit. I mean, people interviewed me and I was in high school, law school, I wasn't paying attention, whatever. Like, I had no idea what they were doing.
Right.
So I go to law school, graduate from law school in 1991. I clerk for Harlington Wood, a judge on the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals, who is also a giant in this area. I work for the Department of Justice myself in the Antitrust Division. I decide I want to be a law professor. So I'm on the market interviewing for jobs. And I interview at the University of Texas, where the chairs of the appointments committee were a man named Sam Issacharoff, who is now a professor at New York University Law School, and his wife, Cindy Eslin. So Sam Issacharoff, it turns out, had been a lawyer in the Department of Justice and the Voting Rights Act. So I'm doing my interview in Austin, Texas, and it comes out that I'm from Springfield, Illinois. And Sam Issacharoff says to me, this is, I've been a law professor now for 25 years. Sam Issacharoff says, do you know Velma Carey?
Wow.
And I said, yeah, it's my grandmother. And so he goes on and on and on. And he said, she was telling me this story about this girl. And he recounts the story that I just told you. And I said, yeah, that was me. And so we had this sort of weird moment. And so to this day, Sam Issacharoff and his wife Cindy are good friends of mine.
Wow.
And yeah.
So, but what's interesting, you went to college for engineering. I mean, did you know you were going to end up being a lawyer? No. I thought you were doing engineering.
I was going to be a biomedical engineer. Yeah. Now that story is
right. Well, we don't get into that.
Random, but we don't want to get into that story.
I mean, do you feel like what happened that your change, like your direction or your course, like would you be in a different place if that experience had not occurred, or if you hadn't fought it?
Yeah.
Do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think that. Again, this is hard to do when I haven't thought about it. Usually when I do interviews, I really think about what I'm going to say. I mean, in some ways, I am a lot like the kid I was who grew up here. In some ways, I come back here and I think, how did I turn out to be the person I am now? And I think it's useful to end up at this story about Grandma. Because, I just was profiled in the Yale Alumni magazine.
Yeah, that was a good article.
And, while I didn't talk about this particular incident, I did talk about my grandmother, and our grandmother, I try to live my life with her as my example, being of use, doing things that I'm called to do, trying to make the world a better place. Not just our grandmother, our whole family has been
our
about
mom
that.
too.
Yeah, that's right. I don't, and so in that sense, it's not that different.
Sure.
I mean, there was a wrong that needed to be righted, and I think one of the sad things about being in 2018 is the idea that in some ways
It still happens.
it not only still happens, but racial discrimination seems more rife now maybe than it did in 1984. And then when that happened in 1984, we were just like, really? This is 1984. Seems like the older I get, the more you recognize and see about
all
how
those
much
small
things haven't
experiences.
changed. Yeah.
I mean, we hear about the bigger experience on a grander scale, but there's all these little pervasive.
Yeah.
I remember Maya Angelou talked about how how it feels when somebody's just picking your hair out one at a time, and how it's a little painful and it stings.
Right.
You don't really notice it, but over time,
Right.
all of a sudden you're bald.
Right.
So it kind of reminds me of those small experiences. All right, so I have to ask, are you in the Springfield High School Hall of Fame, or whatever we have, the Alumni Hall of Fame? I mean, you are clearly one of the most successful people that have
Clearly.
come out of the city. I mean, I know I'm your sister, but I mean,
Yeah.
clearly
Yes.
you are one of the most successful people to come
Yes.
out of the public school system.
Out of the public school
So are you in like some Alumni Association Hall of Fame thing,
I
or-
will say, as we sit on the stairs of
Uh-huh.
Springfield High School, that since I graduated from the school, I have never been contacted or asked to come back in any way
to speak or
to
anything?
speak. Nope.
I mean, because it seems like you like do a graduation speech or
No, they have
something.
people
Yeah, I
do
don't
that.
know. I don't know if they do those as much as in colleges, but
Yeah.
interesting.
You would think.
So if they asked, would you say yes? What would you say?
I don't know.
Okay. Curious.
I don't know.
Well, there's our answer.
Yeah. I will say on that, you know, I was gonna be a little salty and say, like, I don't know why I would, because I don't know, you know, why I would want to suggest that they should have credit for anything.
Right. Have you ever gotten
But-
an apology?
No.
Okay.
But what I will say, I do want to say that I had some amazing and beloved teachers, people we were just talking about. My math teacher,
Well-
Mr. Dooley, and my English teacher,
Mrs. Rappel.
Bernice Rappel.
Well, and we have to say
and
there's
Daria Nice.
there's
and-
three of us. There's three girls, and so we always say that Tracey is the smartest one. Although Mrs. Rappel says I'm smart. So so they were so
My
a lot of good
science
experiences.
teachers.
Yeah, a lot of
I
good
had-
experiences. But
I got a really good education here. I have no idea what it's like now, but
well, I mean, my kids came here, and
okay.
I think things are pretty good. But like you said, there's still those pervasive issues
Right.
that I still think need
Right,
to be
and
handled.
I will say about those, my teachers were always rooting for me.
Yeah.
I have no idea what was going on with
Yeah.
the principal and the head counselor, but there were lots of people who were taking care of me. So I would say maybe if someone happened to call me, I would do it in their honor.
Well, especially like for Mrs. Benz. I mean,
Oh, right, that's what I mean.
All right, well, thanks. She's pretty busy, so we've got to get going. But thanks for...
This was fun.
Yeah, this was fun. And like I said, I think it's just... although
Now I'm gonna
Tracey...
have to be in 3 hours of therapy to
Right.
you know.
But I just always feel like there are people, and I don't like to use the word ordinary, but I think because they're not famous or because they haven't done something else spectacular, that still shine in other ways. And so we started out with Tracey. All right, so we'll see. I've got a good one for our next one, so we'll see you in a week. All right, thanks.
Now, who's your next person?